This is the fourth series in a series of recordings on typographic hierarchy on the web. And in this case, we are going to continue what we were doing in terms of styling our page. We're going to look at a property we haven't done yet, the text align property, and do alignment. And where we left off before, our page looked like this because we had just added in a CSS reset. So this is the reset from Eric Meyer, and that has the effect of removing all the borders, margins and padding and spacing. So all those default spacing is there. If we inspect it here in the inspector, we can see it in action. We can select an element here, and if you look over in the gray area, right here, this user agent style sheet is what the browser itself adds. So the user agent is the browser. And so the reset has the effect of removing those. It has a margin, block element, bold font weight, and things like that. And what the reset has done, and you can see here this is coming from the reset, is it's setting margin 0, padding to 0, border 0, and so forth. And so that is what the reset is taking away. But now what we're going to start doing is looking at resetting some of the margins and borders and alignments and things in order to group these things better together. Because right now, while we took out the default spacing, it's really not easy to read at all because there's no spacing at all. So one of the ways we're going to talk about that is also thinking about this idea of graphic design principles, some of the Gestalt principles. So the Gestalt principles have to do with how we see things and the way our eyes try to distinguish shapes and objects and meaning from each other. And so there's more, but just to keep things a little brief, today we're going to talk about this idea of common regions. And that's here, as what you can see, they've used these bounding boxes to make you, when you look at this, your eye sort of saw two groups of circles. Right? If those boxes weren't there, you would just see maybe rows, maybe columns. It depends because they're all kind of evenly spaced. So that's one way, is by drawing boxes around things, which is pretty easy on the web because everything is a box, and so adding a border to it, voila, there you go. That's one way to group things together. And another way is through proximity, or meaning basically how close things are, right? So in this case, by adding this space here, that is what lets you see these two groups. I've now done enclosure to solidify the point, but really just that space between them, you now see two groups of circles as opposed to one. Also, by the way, there's some other principles that do things like make you see this as rectangles, right? You kind of fill in the rectangles and other things like that. But those two we're going to look at a little bit today to help us as we go through and try to make this into a little bit better. And so we're also going to have to jump a little bit into some CSS layout, but I'm going to do it in a very basic way and stick with only a couple properties like margins and padding, and focus most on the typographic ones as well. So let me go back to our style CSS sheet. So here we go. This is our page, and we probably want to do things like separate out the header from the rest of the page, right? So one way we can do that is with margins. So margins are a good way to separate elements from each other. So I might say here, margin bottom 2M. All right, and then I'm also going to do that to my article as well. The article element, margin top 2M. Okay, and actually the margins will collapse, so I don't actually need to do, let me take that one out. If I just have one, it'll do that. So I'm actually for now going to remove the article. Remove the margin bottom. What I'm going to do on the article margin is just to add a little space between things. I'm going to add some margins around it. So margin. So with margin, by the way, you can do two different ways. You can do margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right as separate properties, or you can do it in one where you do numbers. So you could say, top right, bottom left. So I might say, 0, and it starts, by the way, the first number is the top, second number is the right. So I'm going to say 5%. And actually, if you just do two numbers, the first one is for the top and the bottom, the second one is for the left and right. So I just moved it out a little bit. This is, like I said, the very basic um, layout stuff I'm going to do. Normally I would do much more because we might want to do things like make this into 2 columns on wider screens, 1 column on smaller, and all sorts of stuff, but I'm going to try to focus on the typography here. And I might actually even do something similar for the careers in the creative arts, right? So I might say 2M and just change that to margin even. And get it spaced out more. If I want it to be the same as the other one, I could do the same 5% on that as well. But adding in that margin all around now has separated out this header from there. I still haven't styled the text for the date and everything. I'm going to leave that off for now since we're running very long. And I'm going to jump next into now separating out these next pieces. So this also, sometimes you have to go back in and look at your HTML again, because sometimes you can't do what you might want to do. So let's take a look at that one. So in the article heading, that's when I have the schedule. We have that there. So that one as well, I might do something where I really want to separate this out. And so I add in either a margin or a padding. Padding is generally when you want to add space inside of an element, and you could still have a background color around it and other things like that, whereas margin is spacing one element from another. So I might actually add in some stuff there. So let's see, I'll just add a margin bottom here. Okay, so I'm just, again, separating some things out a little bit. Okay, so now we have schedule, and then in here we have conference openings. And now what I want to do is separate conference opening from the rest of the stuff. Oh, I just realized I hadn't, done some more on this, but that's okay. We might want to come back and decide whether we want to leave these as they are. It looks a little different when they don't have the same content as inside the sessions and whether we want to do it. But for now, what I'm going to do is keep the focus on the inside each of these sessions on these elements here. So what I want to do is separate out a couple things. So we have a session in a time, and then we have 4 tracks that apply to it. So I want to separate those out a little bit, and I haven't done as much as I could do yet. So we have divs called schedule sections that are around each one of them, schedule session. So on that, I'm going to do this here, schedule session. Then I might decide to use that to like separate the sessions out from each other, right? So we might have, again, margin, bottom. I'll use that 2M again on that. All right. Oh, sorry, schedule section. Okay. So already starting to look a little bit better here. We have that in. Now the problem I'm facing is, while these 3 things are a group, the track, the title, and the room, I didn't do anything in my HTML to allow me to style it that way. So theoretically, I could use the room and add, like a bottom margin to that. And I'm just going to show this to you, but then delete it, and I'll tell you why it's not a great idea. So margin, bottom, 1M. All right, so this is one way to do it. So that gives sort of the spacing that we're looking for where we now can see each of those as a group, right? And so this is that proximity thing because the fine arts and the title and the room are next to each other. I get that proximity, and it looks a bit better. However, then if the rooms I have anywhere else, I may or may not want that, right? So I may not always want the room to be the one that takes that margin. So probably it's even better if instead of adding that margin bottom 1em to the room, I would add it around each of these. And you'll find also that if you're doing responsive web design and so forth, and I want to move these pieces around later, this will help too. So what I would actually do is go back in to each of these. I'm using the command key, would be control on the Mac, and selecting each of these groupings. By the way, command U, see I missed the little beginning and closing tag. It removes the last one that you did. So if you make a mistake while you're doing this, you can do command U and get rid of the last one. So I might go through here, select these out, and bear with me a little bit. I'm just going to actually go through and do all of these, show you a little bit more how you might actually have to do it. And we're going to add a div around these that we're going to call presentation. So in our presentation information or something like that, but I'm just going to call it presentation to keep it easy. So this is a presentation. So that actually is a presentation. I think I might have missed the one at the top. Yes. Okay. So around all those, we can wrap and div with a class of presentation. And remember again, sometimes you have to wait a second because this takes a while it has to wrap these around everything. So this you see at the bottom here is div.presentation means a div with a class of presentation, and it comes out to make that div, and because we're wrapping it, it makes also the closing one as well. And then I have to remember to hit the enter to apply it. So now that I have that presentation around everything, now I can do my presentation, margin bottom 1em, like that. And there we go. So now these are separated out a lot more. I could also look at, affecting the line height on things. I might decide that, well, these are a little bit too close to each other. I don't want everything quite so close, so, I might bump up the line height. If you want to do multiple ones at a time, if you think that's also valid, so we have the track title, the presentation title, and the room that you could apply it to. So sometimes if you want to apply to multiple, you can. You can also try, applying it to the element line height 1.4. All right. So now we have a little bit more space between those, or I could individually do them and see how that works. So I might just decide, oh, well, actually, I want the line height. I want the room to be a bit closer to the Dance for Life than the other one. Later on, I might actually have descriptions of each of these and put it in there. Now, the other problem we have right now is that the session and time is running into that there. So on the presentation, we're going to do a couple other things. So in addition to a margin bottom, I'm going to add a margin left. Let's make it 2em. All right, and that is going to move things out, so that separates them out even more and helps show that this is underneath the session 3, right? So this is part of session 3 there. And then now for the other pieces, so that's session and time, um, so we have, schedule, section, we have the title, we have the time. So I might have to go again here and select these and wrap these in an element. So I could do the time, I could base some spacing on the time to space things out. But in this case, what I'd rather do, just also in case I want to do something more with the layout later, this is thinking ahead a little bit to the layout, so you always have a couple things in mind. That's one of the fun part and the challenges of web design. So we're going to wrap that with a div of session info, right? And so then I could um, add that to it, and that should hopefully update. There we go. So now here's the other thing that I like to look at as well. So now we've got a lot more spacing between things. It's a lot easier. Things are nicely chunked. There's a few things that I want to change, like this room here should probably may or may not need to change. Or I could also like group these two together if I want the room there, or just add the room both to this one and that one. If I do that, it makes it more consistent with the other ones that have the, that in the room next to each other. Um, so, actually, sorry, I missed one. Breakfast is should be at the same level as conference opening. So actually, we should go and let's fix that. See, once you start to get your spacing right and everything, you can start to notice your own mistakes. So this breakfast got missed somehow. I see. It should have been around this H5. Was supposed to be around breakfast. And, all right. Yeah, registration and, all right, sorry. I'm really messing this up now. All right, let's go back and do this. So this registration and continental breakfast should be in H3. And, oh, sorry, this is actually a presentation, isn't it? So that's sort of the problem I had. Conference opening. So this is a good example of something where I might go back and ask the client. In this case, it would have been myself who didn't type it up as well as I could have. So it seems like one is registration and continental breakfast at 8:30, and then opening remarks at 9, and they were not done in the right order. So these opening remarks would have their own time. And this would also be an H5. So it's actually good to see we all make mistakes. H5, presentation title. Okay. Oops. Didn't hit enter. All right, and then I also may want to, in the same way I did presentation, around those other things, I may want to wrap these as well. So, and then this one. Okay. Um, so I was moving on to the session info, and we wrapped around that. We have other piece here as well. So let me get back to what I was going to mention before. Right now we have situation where we end up having 2M here because this is the margin bottom from the schedule section, all right, and 2M here, which is the margin bottom from the session info, right? So session info, margin bottom, schedule section, margin bottom. All right. What I've noticed is that if you really want to help the eye differentiate things, I would reduce the amount of space here so that there's less space between this title and the content it's talking about than there is space between that and the previous one. So it gives a more clear separation of these elements. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is on session info, I'm going to change the margin bottom here to 1M. And if we wanted to really separate out even more, we could do schedule section, maybe 2.5M or something like that. And so then, and by the way, you notice that the boxes that this draws around are that Gestalt principle of enclosure. We could use that as well. Some other things you could do if you wanted to use more than just spacing to separate these out. So, right now we have a pretty good um, typographic hierarchy. It's pretty easy to go through and read this and see what's what and what's different and read the page. But there are other things that you could do if you wanted to, right? So just from a web design perspective, I think actually I might keep this pretty much as it is for now. But in terms of color and lines and things, you can use borders and other pieces like that. So I'm just going to use the schedule section for now, just as an example of how you might do that. So I might have border 1 pixel solid in a dark gray. Usually when you have a border around something, then you don't want the text to come right up to it. So I'm going to want to add some space between this border and the text around it, and that is where padding comes in. So padding, 10 pixels or something like that. Okay. Whoops, I didn't add a semicolon here. There we go. All right, so you make sure you have some spacing in that. So now that we go through, that's another way to separate these out. If you wanted to, you could also, add in a background color, of, I don't know. This is probably not going to work very well. Let's make it even lighter, so that's also not a great color as a background color to add in this case, but those are other ways to do it, right? What I often find is that you don't want to use too many techniques. Okay, so what happens, one sort of sign that people do when we're first starting out, is we often like pile on these techniques for creating the effects of proximity and closure and so forth. So right now, to separate these things, we have the proximity, right? So by adding distance, it's separated. Then we added the enclosure with the box. The background color also works as enclosures. And so with all of those together, this starts to get to be a little bit much. So sometimes you might start taking some things away, like I might take away that border. So I just use background color. Or take away the background color, just use the space. It's up to you. If you're going for a more minimalist effect, then you use as little as possible, right? So I might take all these things away. So I just use my indentation and spacing between things to tell the difference. or I could do something like um, just use, instead of a full border, uh, a border bottom, something like that. So now with a border bottom in there, I added one other, piece that helps keep these things separated, but it's a more minimal look than adding a border all the way around it, and things like that. Okay, so there we go. We have a page where we've added some typographic hierarchy, and has a big difference between as it was as an original page and as it is now, with the styling. And actually, just to like see how that goes, I'm gonna take out these two style sheets for a second and show you. It should still be readable based on your HTML. People still should be able to go down and look at it and read it, and this is definitely readable, um, and even has some differentiation with typographic hierarchy. But it should be, once you add in your CSS and styling and everything like that, it should be much more readable.